In his State of the Nation address, President Cyril Ramaphosa vowed to address all the weaknesses that the expert panel appointed to review the country's response to the July unrest have identified. He says the government accepts the report on the July unrest and the fact that the cabinet should shoulder the blame for the lootings and killings of innocent people. The state capture report response plan will also be presented to Parliament by June. Ramaphosa also announced an extension of the 350 Rand social relief of distress grant to the end of March next year. He says despite businesses' efforts to help grow the economy quicker, it will take time to create enough jobs for millions of South Africans. Ramaphosa says it is government's intention not to leave anyone behind in employment opportunities. Well, President Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address was underpinned by economic policy. The president emphasized that the state of a nation was heavily dependent on its economic state and admitted that the country is currently on an unsustainable trajectory with weak growth and high unemployment. Well, to give us a view on the SONA, I'm joined by Dr Marius Oosthuizen. He's from the Conscientious Foresight Department at GIBS. Thanks very much for joining us, sir. Now, some say that the SONA was more of the same old promises, lacking in actionable timelines and so on. What's your take on what the president announced, and did you get a sense of urgency?
Well, Nompa, it's always good speaking to you, and good afternoon to your listeners. We think that the president's speech was, as expected, a wide-ranging speech covering a whole range of issues. You mentioned economic growth, you mentioned security, he also spoke about social security. But there is a sense that this is perhaps President Ramaphosa's first leadership speech where he is giving direction to the country. In a way, one could see that he's using the speech to educate even his own constituency about the need for economic growth. We know that the ANC historically has emphasized the role of the state. And so this is a president that's looking really to the private sector to provide the growth of jobs. But as you say, willing to use state coffers to provide social security, even though, as the president himself said, we are under severe fiscal pressure.
Now, the president spoke to the network industries like the railways and ports, talking about the enabling of partnerships in this regard to boosting services that will aid in moving the economy forward. What are your thoughts around that? And again, do you sense a sense of urgency?
Well, I think that's very critical. And actually, many would think that that's a boring part of the speech because it's dealing with technical economic jargon like network industries. But really, it's at the heart of the president's strategy for the country. If we think about where these SOEs come from, Eskom, Transnet, PRASA, they really are the core industrial heart of the economy. And over the last 10 years, because of state capture, corruption, mismanagement, we've seen the weakening of those institutions. And so what the president is suggesting is that if we can strengthen the core industrial heart of the economy, we can improve the competitiveness of the economy, we can get more investment in the economy, and of course that will bring the growth and the jobs. Now, the critics of the president, the likes of the EFF, they will point fingers at the president and say he's, as Malema said, he's outsourcing the governance of the country to the private sector. But the argument, of course, as the president himself said, is that 80% of all jobs sit in the private sector. And so to the extent that the state-owned enterprises enable private sector growth, we think that the president is spot on.
One of the potentially game-changing measures, especially for the job-creating SME sector, was the announcement of a red tape task team. This is an issue, of course, that's been neglected for years, despite promises year in, year out. Are you hopeful? And just explain to our viewers some of the appreciable benefits that could be derived from this if it's done correctly.
Well, we think that the president's analysis of what needs to be done is spot on and correct, and that what does make one hopeful. We think that there's a shift in the tone of the president. There's a momentum in the direction of improving the environment of business, which, of course, for the private sector is very important. But at the same time, the president himself acknowledged the very difficult task of rebuilding the state and rebuilding government. And so when we talk about removing red tape, that process itself of promulgating new regulations, of getting departments to be more efficient, that is a very difficult task. And in many ways, it's the president needing to clean house within the ANC, within government. And so I would say in the short term, definitely not hopeful. But in the medium to long term, the president is absolutely right. We need to do those things. And just to put that in perspective, red tape in the context of business is thought of as a cost of doing business. And so if the cost of doing business in South Africa is more than the cost of doing business in Kenya or Ghana, then the money, the capital, the jobs, the growth will go to those countries. And so again, we think the president in the medium term, if he can get it right, if he can get those departments to support his vision, we think the president is quite right.
One last thing, of course, the president did refer to the state capture report, talking about how corruption has really undermined the progress of the economy and so on and so forth. But I suppose he can talk about it until the cows come home. We really need to see that those who are responsible for corruption are brought to book. Otherwise, going forward, it makes it very difficult for business to have confidence to invest in the economy.
Well, as the president was indicating, that he's trying to facilitate a shift in the country from state capture to social compacting, to the extent that the investigative institutions, the National Prosecuting Authority, can take the information from the state capture report, from the Zondo Commission, and turn that into cases, to prosecute those cases. What's going to happen is that's going to strengthen the rule of law, and then we'll move into this new normal, or this new dawn, as the president would want us to believe, of social compacting between government and business with civil society. But it is going to be a challenge. The president has shown himself to be a very slow, tactical, strategic operator, relying on process rather than personality. Can he shift the country from state capture to social compacts? It remains to be seen.
Well, we will see. Thank you so much, Dr. Marius Oosthuizen. He's from the Conscientious Foresight Department at